Great question. That was actually the first. You spoiled the first question I was going to ask. I was going to say, don't you just live in caves? But yeah, here we go. Let's get this intro out of the way. Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you're doing well, and it's time today for an exclusive conversation and interview with the one and only singer-songwriter, musical visionary, Haley Dahl, aka Sloppy Jane. Although is that accurate? Like I know Sloppy Jane is like the band, but do you yourself as kind of like a musical persona? Do you identify as Sloppy Jane, or is that more just like the group?
I think it's more so the group or the project.
Yeah.
I don't identify as Sloppy Jane, although when people call me Jane, I don't care. Like, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter.
Got it. Well, again, I will make mention of the fact that last year, Sloppy Jane's record Madison was one of my favorites of the year. Loved it. Made my best records of 2021 list. We're going to be talking about that record and anything else that comes up in the convo. First off, how are you doing? Thanks for coming through.
I'm doing pretty good. I'm in New York, rehearsing for tour right now. Yeah. How are you?
Good. I'm great. Excited to talk about this album. I mean, it's been out for a while. Everybody has had a long time to digest it and discover it, come to terms with it as well. How do you feel like the reception has been so far, especially given that, for you stylistically, this has been kind of a huge project in terms of like what has been accomplished and a big stylistic change for you too.
Yeah. It feels really good to have people, to have so many people care about it. Like, I think that it's a big relief. I think that something that's true in general is that, there's a big expectation set on how it's supposed to feel to have people saying really enthusiastic stuff about what you do. And some of that is true. Like, obviously I do feel good having people like it, but I think that making it was so much more special that sometimes then, staring at the computer and reading what people have to say about something like doesn't feel quite as important.
Right. Do you think the weight of it will hit you harder once maybe you're touring behind the record and you're kind of seeing like, people actually interacting live with what you've done here?
Definitely. When I see people clap, that's it.
That's why for the applause, you do it.
My favorite part of everything.
Let me rewind for a second and get a sense of like, it was several years ago that you came out with your record Willow, which like, with that album and stuff prior, Sloppy Jane stylistically was really like more in the direction of like, punk and experimental rock and art punk and so on and so forth. But like this new record is much more in a singer-songwriter vein, and they're like, very subtle throwback notes that we will also kind of get into deeper into the interview. But like, when exactly did you start to foresee this, genre switch that you've kind of undergone on this new LP? Like, when did you decide like we need to go in a different direction here?
I don't think that I ever really thought of it that way. I haven't made very many things, so I think that it's really easy to look at the first thing and be like, oh, she did this and then she like made a genre switch. But I kind of see myself as an artist where I think that everything that I make will work with different palettes all the time. I never saw myself specifically as like a rock artist or an experimental artist. And to me, there's a lot of similarities between the two records, and that they're both kind of structured in this like linear narrative way that is sort of intended to be played live. They both include a lot of like all the weird like clapping and cheering and laughing, and those kinds of textures are like present in both records. They both have a lot of like unexpected left turns in like key changes, tempo changes. And I think, those are the things that I see as more definitive about what I do, rather than, which instruments are being played or what genre it fits under. So I think that like the sound of the record was very much designed for the cave. Like the first thing that I decided about the second record that I was going to make was that it was going to be this big record in a cave. And I didn't like the idea of shredding guitars in a cave. I think that's self-indulgent in a way that I don't like. It's not romantic.
So even before like a lot of the narrative and story ideas that you have driving these tracks, you decided on cave.
Yeah, it was kind of all one. Like I had this big day, had a big day once, where I had was having a very like heartbreak meltdown in the streets of New York, and I was walking around and I found this big oversized suit hanging on a fence post, and I put it on while I was crying, and I decided that I was going to wear the suit until it rotted off my body, and then I was walking home and I found a keyboard in a trash can. And I picked up the keyboard, I brought it to my house, and I didn't play piano, but I decided I was going to learn. And I just, the whole idea just came at once that day where I was like, I'm going to make this record in a cave and I'm going to wear this suit until it rots off my body. And then I just didn't do anything except for work on it for years. And I wore the suit for a year without washing or changing it. And yeah, it was just crazy. I don't know. It just really all came at once.
It sounds like metaphorically you put yourself in like a cocoon and then you incubated in it and then came out of it.
Yeah, it was like the idea of wearing this like grown-up set, like how little kids put on like their parents' outfits that are too big. And I was like, and I'm going to grow into it or something.
Right. Right. Wow. I did not expect that to be to be just sort of like the decision here. Well, I mean, look, before you decided or as you decided that this was going to be kind of performed and recorded in a cave, it was going to happen in a cave, unfold in a cave. You hadn't yet chosen the cave, so it's like, what exactly was that kind of research process like in terms of looking for caves? A word I don't often get to use, spelunking. I guess you did some spelunking and stuff over the course of this. Finding caves, and also I guess were you looking into stuff like natural reverb, trying to find like the best cave to perform in? What makes a good cave for a musical performance? I don't know.
Yeah. Figuring out what we needed in a cave was a big part. I fully didn't know anything about caves and hadn't been to any in my, like maybe I had been to like one of a, like a touristy one as a kid or something, but I wasn't a nature person at all. And I didn't know anything about them, but I decided, that I wanted to do this on this big kind of romantic whim. And I had a different understanding of what caves were like. I thought that you walk in and it's just this big room with a flat floor, and I didn't see it as like a like I thought you could just walk into them,
right? Just walk into them, record in them, do whatever you want.
Yeah, I thought you could just walk straight in, and then you're in the cave. And I found out that was not true.
I guess probably a presumption that we were both sort of lied to about through cartoons. I think we were really kind of tricked into that by big animation, but it's just not the case.
Definitely. And also, I mean, don't even get me started on the depiction of cave reverbs in cartoons. They're always completely off. In Lord of the Rings, cave sound design, horrible.
Man, every time you see a cave in a cartoon or a movie, it's completely ruined for you with all the time that you've spent in a cave. That's not how a cave sounds.
Like, it's not how it sounds. It's not how it sounds. But I think that, we wanted one. Initially, we were like, we want a wild cave. Like, we don't want one that has ever been manicured by human beings. And
not a man-made cave.
Not a man-made cave, or like not even like the tourist ones. It's like they're real caves, but they've been like dynamite blasted more open. They've had like paved floors, so people can walk through them. And we were like, we don't want any of that. But we found out really quickly that was like actually impossible. Mostly because most entrances, like even if there's a big room in a cave, in a wild cave, like you usually have to crawl in through a tiny hole to get into them and crawl for a long time, and you can't get a piano in there. There's just no way, and you just can't do it. And not only that, but if there isn't electricity, you also can't really do it on a large scale because generators make noise, and with the reverb, then you can't use, like, you just can't record using a generator. And so it's like you could record using field recorders, but then syncing stuff is really hard, and that also degrades the quality. So we eventually did decide that we were going to use more of like a tourist attraction cave. And basically I just had this running spreadsheet of like every cave that I could find a contact information for in the United States that seemed like you could maybe get a piano into it. And I would just email them and call them day after day after day and be like, can I come and do a demo session there to see if we can record an album in there? And also, can we do it for free? Because I don't have any money to give you. And so me and different collaborators, my friend Mika, who did all of the video work, our old collaborator, Jack Wetmore, who he did a lot of the like early engineering stuff. Our guitar player, Al Nardo, everyone kind of, we went in different shifts of who was going, but we would go on these trips for like sometimes like a month at a time and just go from cave to cave to cave to cave, working with musicians that were local to the area and doing these demo recording sessions where we could test the quality of the cave and also find out about like what's difficult about recording in caves, which there's a lot. And so we learned a lot, and we eventually landed on Lost World Caverns, which was the easiest one to get everything into, but still required like carrying a piano like down and up like about 500 stairs and around all these twisty things.
With each session, did you have to bring the piano in and out?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. And what did it mean then once the piano was out? Were you loading it onto a truck and then driving it to another location too? Or was there somewhere nearby you were kind of housing it?
No, we lived in the van with the piano.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. And was the piano kind of in terms of like, you know, moving the instrumentation in and working with the instrumentation generally, was the piano like the biggest issue, or was there kind of another pain in the ass?
No, there was other stuff. So humidity makes tuning really difficult for everything.
Right.
And so something that we learned is that like once you bring everything in, you have to acclimate it. Like you open up everybody's cases and you leave everything for like 45 minutes and you don't touch it. And that's the same for recording gear. And that's the same for film equipment, is like you just do not touch it before turning it on. You leave it for a while. And then the same when you bring it out. Something that was also a pain in the ass when going around from place to place was there's this thing called white nose syndrome, which is a fungus that it's killing all the bats in America. And that people bring from cave to cave with their gear. So in between everywhere that we went, we have to totally wipe down everything that we have with rubbing alcohol so that we are not bringing fungus into the car. And then, yeah, a big thing too is that with the humidity, bow hair on for like chamber instruments they don't get tight all the way in how humid it is. So we had to find, there's this company called Incredibow that does weatherproof bows that stay permanently tight, and they lent us products for the final recordings.
Got it. And you know, this syndrome that you're talking about, was that anything anybody actually dealt with, or something you were just mostly working on preventing?
No, we were just working on preventing it. Like it's just was another factor of stuff to like, there's just all these weird layers of things to think about where it's like, you're worried about, you know, how the recording is going to record, and you're worried about how the video is going to capture, and you're worried about how the humidity is going to affect the instruments, and you're worried about how the instruments are going to be played and if it sounds good in the first place. And I'm worried about if the songs are good in the first place. And then on top of that, we have to be worried about infecting bats with fungus.
Well, on top of that, kind of another like, you know, huge question mark is just generally like the personnel aspect of this record, because this album is also, you know, one of your biggest undertakings in terms of just, you know, the musicians on it, just everyone involved. Like, you know, what were some of the challenges in terms of like finding everybody who you needed to play all the arranged instrumentation on the record, you know, bringing them all together for the performances and for the recordings, and just, again, making it all kind of work in the cave?
Yeah. I mean, I think that like this project really runs on the fumes of like everyone having incredible attitudes, and it being fun. Like when a project is fun, people want to do it. And I think that like if I had tried to make this same album in a studio, I think it would have been harder to get people involved. But because we're making a record in a cave and it's going to be this big adventure, like people want to be involved in it. And like, I'm very lucky that so many people wanted to be involved. Like I was turning people away to play the record.
Wow.
Like, because I couldn't arrange enough.
There's a lot of enthusiasm when caves are involved.
Yeah, there was a lot of enthusiasm, like just in like our community in Brooklyn. And then we also like, you know, a lot of the people who are in the live band went to Berkeley in Boston. And so we had like a lot of ties there with people who wanted to play from there. We actually made an internship program at Berkeley where people could get academic credit for playing on the record.
Wow.
That's
amazing.
Was our cello player Sean Brennan's like masterful concepts. He made that happen. Yeah, so that was cool. And so yeah, it was just, you know, people just wanted to. And we had a lot of different rehearsals. Like we rehearsed sometimes like at the weird house I was living in Brooklyn, and we rehearsed at like a DIY venue that had recently been shut down. And we went and we rehearsed like at Berkeley in Boston a couple times.
Got it. And, you know, in terms of like, I guess just some of the recording logistics and just the sound of the cave in general, because, you know, if you listen to the record, obviously like being there brings a certain kind of ambiance. You know, either in this cave or in other caves that you were kind of testing out, were there struggles in terms of, you know, getting it to sound exactly right, or how you envisioned it through, you know, recording and engineering? Was the reverb ever too much? Was there a lot of like, you know, bleed between the instrumentation? Did you or anybody else in the band need to alter their way of playing a little bit just to kind of make it balance in the final recording?
I think that Lost World Caverns specifically, the reverb there is incredible. Like it's incredible, not even just in like its ability to be giant, but it also in its ability to not be muddy, which is something we were looking for. Like there's this place called Devil's Gate in Los Angeles. That's this crazy tunnel that's under, it's under this weird park in La Cañada. And it has one of my favorite reverbs because it's just so crazy. It has this super long decay, but you really could never record anything serious in there because it just sounds too much. And there you could record some cool like drone stuff in there, or like something you wanted to sound like really weird, but it wouldn't be legible. But at Lost World Caverns, there's this crazy thing where it has this big decay, but it's all very far away. Like up close, things aren't bleeding together. And so with different mic placements, like keeping, you know, having spot mics on sections, and then like further and further, you do get like pretty good isolation. And so that's really cool. And also just a testament to like Ryan Howe, who engineered the whole thing. He just did a really great job.
Yeah. I mean, either him or you in kind of the final, you know, mixes and masters of the project, were any touch-ups or effects like all that necessary? Or, you know, were you really able to just kind of like let the sound of the cave be the sound?
The sound of the cave is the sound.
Yeah.
We didn't add really anything else. Like, I think that, you know, Noah Georgeson mixed it. And he did he's cool because he does indie stuff, but also does a lot of ambient stuff. So he did a really wonderful job kind of like letting the space live in the right way. But things that were a little bit difficult in mixing were like noticing, like, you know, because some things were recorded totally live and some things were recorded section by section. And in those things that were recorded section by section, hearing moments of ambience shift or change when like a track went in or out was like a little bit difficult to do. And that was something we had to be really meticulous about, where I had to like listen for like when the cave drips like changed in a way that was notable. But no, we didn't add anything really that wasn't there. It just sounds amazing.
Okay, great. Let me dive a little bit into some of the storytelling and narratives that you engage with on this record. One of the things that, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, but one of the things that like really struck me about the album and, continues to strike me as I come back to listen to it, is that there's something about it, even before I started reading into the lyrics, that feels like distinctly 70s about it. I don't know what it is about the album, but it just sort of seems like the stories you're telling and just the vibe of it overall just seems like it's coming from a bygone era. And I was hoping that you could maybe shed some light on exactly why that is, because like once you read into some of the stories, it becomes a little more apparent. But but still, there's something like, again, just like strangely old about it, but not nostalgic. It just kind of feels like I'm being transported to a wholly different time period in a way.
Cool. Well, I think I've thought about this a little bit because I've heard people say that. I mean, honestly, like I listen to a lot of music from the 70s, but I don't think that I was intentionally trying to make like a 70s sounding album, but I think that
and that's the other thing. It's like it doesn't sound 70s in like a stereotypical way. It's not like I've put on a Bowie record or something like that.
Yeah.
It just, again, there's something about it that gives that essence, but not in a cliche way.
Yeah, well, thank you, first of all. But I think that part of it is just honestly the production method. Like, you had this period of time in earlier pop music where the intention was always to just get things as big as you could get them in a room. And I think that like the 70s was kind of the end of that. And then after that, you have stuff where people are trying to like do less, if that makes sense. Like, like everything started being like, oh, well, everything can be on a synth. Like,
yeah, and in the 80s, like each individual piece of instrumentation is super isolated in terms of how it's being presented to the audience.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like, like 60s pop music, like, I mean, obviously like all the Phil Spector stuff like that, like Wall of Sound is like a direct influence on like what, like, I think that part of it just is like this idea of like largeness. And like some of the instrumentation, like I think that chamber instruments were like very present in like pop music in the 70s. But I think also just it's a little bit cartoonish, which I think was happening a lot then too. And that's something that I like, is for like, I know that a lot of the record is like kind of dark, but I see it as being dark in this kind of like tongue in cheeky way. And like the Beatles albums are like that and stuff too.
Well, I think like another aspect of it that, continued to push in that direction a little bit for me were some of the narratives on the LP, especially some of the darker ones, that deal in themes like death. And the way that you tell a lot of these stories, whether they be, that of Judy Bruce or, some of the darker moments on the back end of the LP, the more I think about it, the more it's almost like the vibe of them reads to me almost like an old wives' tale or something, or maybe something that I might have heard adults talking about when I was a kid, about somebody having maybe killed, it's like a rumor, or somebody killed somebody, or somebody did this or something did that. But, of course, like we're talking about a time before forensic files. So, nobody made like the connection or whatever, you know what I mean? So there's, there's almost like an urban legendy kind of quality to a lot of the stories that you're telling on this LP. Was that a conscious decision?
Sort of. So I really like nursery rhymes.
Yeah.
And nursery rhymes, obviously, like they all have this quality of being these like really fun melodies with really dark content.
Yeah. Many of which have very dark backstories.
Yeah. And so like, I think that like is that's something that just like is throughout most of the music that I've written, is like nursery rhymes are really formative to my style of writing. But I also just, there's this thing that is kind of like, it's one of the main themes in the album. And it's just one of the main themes of like my own feelings that made me make the album the way that I did, like in the cave and in, with all the beautiful instruments, which is just like, this feeling of being like, I am hideous, I'm a monster, my thoughts are horrible, and like, how would I have to present them for you to think it's beautiful? And I think that that's a big part of it too, is like having all of this kind of like this really dark stuff, but that's like being being said in the most beautiful way that it can be said.
I think that's an incredible way to put it. Like when you go out on tour with a lot of this material, do you plan for this to sort of just kind of strictly be a Madison experience, or will you be mixing like, older Sloppy Jane stuff in with all of it too?
It's mixed. I think that I would really like to eventually do a Just Madison set, but also like, I think if there hadn't been a pandemic, we would have slowly transitioned from one to the other. But now it's like we have people who found out about us, while like all during the pandemic. And there's people who like have never gotten to see some of the older songs live or like would want to. And so we found a way to work like some of the old stuff into it too, but it's like mainly Madison oriented.
Got it.
Some other stuff kind of in there.
Now, in terms of like getting the album finished and finally getting it out, would you be able to tell us like when exactly, obviously like, Phoebe Bridgers comes into play and you're signing to, her Satisfactory, a record label?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that came to be, it was actually really funny. Phoebe had mentioned the label stuff to me, like before it even existed. We were getting ready to record Madison. And we were kind of in like the 11th hour of this. And like, we had finally gotten what was like the first kind of, it was really hard to demo the record because it was this weird mix of like me working on music and then there being a bunch of people, like I needed to record it with a bunch of people, but there wasn't money for me to like do that. If I wanted to be able to record the album. But we had recorded one rehearsal and it was the first kind of time that we demoed Party Anthem. And it was the first time I had anything I could show anyone, like even after years of writing it. And I like sent it to a handful of like trusted friends to be like, I think that this is going to be one of the singles on the album. And like, before we go in and record it, is there anything that can I have final notes on anything from anyone? Like, I don't even know what I have time to change, but please someone tell me if there's something I should change. And Phoebe was just like, this is the coolest shit I've ever heard. Like low key, my label might give me a label. And like, if they do, like, I want to sign you immediately. And that was a long time before it actually came to me. And we had a lot of meetings with a lot of people, but it was all over Zoom and stuff. And, it was exciting to have people be interested in the record, but there was this, we kept kind of circling back around to Satisfactory. Like obviously Dead Oceans is an incredible label. Like Phoebe, I just respect very much as an artist, as well as like, I really trust her. And I also just hadn't met anyone else that I was talking to, which is a weird thing where I was just like, how can I like, sign over years of my life to people that I haven't met? Like I emotionally, I just can't.
Right. You gave it to the person who you knew and trusted the most.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that makes total sense. To kind of, rewind a little bit on some of the themes of the LP. I mean, some of the stories that you're telling on this album that you've gathered, come from a time, again, far in the past and are not necessarily like, your own experiences. And, unless maybe you tell me that you're kind of drawing parallels between things that, you've gone through maybe. But, can you go into a little bit like what drew you to some of the stories that you decided to, kind of dive into and manifest in your own way in your work? Is it sort of like an extension of almost like that nursery rhyme ethos that you were telling earlier? Like, I'm just going to find this really dark story or tale that I'm infatuated with and just kind of pretty it up in a way?
Sort of. Well, what's interesting is like, so I build records in a kind of, it doesn't make a lot of sense to other people, so I can't like fully explain it right here, but I have like a very visual format for how I structure albums, and both Willow and Madison are structured the same. And so there's like a piece that there's sometimes I can look at the whole thing that I'm working on, like, and I always have it up on like this big kind of, it looks like the meme with all the, the guy. But it's
no,
like,
go into that more. Which meme do you mean?
The guy,
are you talking about like the wall?
There's the wall and all of and if he's like putting stuff together, and there's the and there's all the strands connecting them.
Continue on. But
Anyway,
if you ever want to break
what
into a meme detour later in the interview, let me know. I'm down for it. I'm down for it.
Awesome. Well, when I write albums, it looks similar to that, where I have like all this stuff.
Oh, are you talking about like the conspiracy wall?
Yes,
it's like all the pictures and the thread coming together and everything.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So that is how you storyboard your records?
Yes.
Got
it. And so like sometimes I'll see that there's a piece missing, where I'm like, something needs to go there, and like I know what feeling it needs to have to like fit this arc. And then I kind of like go back into all my old stuff. Like a lot of the songs on Madison like were written before I like started working on Madison, but they're like were reworked for the album because I like decided that they would fit one of these boxes that needed to be filled. And Judy's Bedroom was one of those where, I like to have this big feeling of something unwinding into chaos, and then returning immediately. Then the next thing that happens needs to be that we're in a place that feels immediately familiar. And I did that on Willow, and then on this one, Judy's Bedroom like has this feeling where it feels like a song that you already know. And I like that about it.
It does. It feels like a campfire sing-along song from when you were a kid or something.
Yeah. And so that was why we decided to put it on it. And it, the reason that I wrote the song was actually just because it got stuck in my head. I was at a photo shoot a bunch of years ago, and Forensic Files was just on in the other room. And it was the Forensic Files episode about Judy Bruce, and the guy just kept saying in this really low voice, and he was like, in Judy Bruce's bedroom, in Judy Bruce's bedroom, like, and they found this in Judy Bruce's bedroom. And I was like,
that's funny that was like that is the connection there, because that episode is how I had to confirm like what you were singing about in the song.
Yeah, and that's it, because that's all that exists about it. And but the cadence of that phrase got stuck in my head.
Right.
And it was just like I was at this shoot, and just in my head, the whole song just came together. And then I wrote it all down as soon as I got home, and it was just done. And it was one of those ones that just like happened really fast. And then I just didn't really think about it again for a long time, because I didn't see how it fit into anything I was doing. And then, years later when I was writing Madison, I was like, I need something that's this feeling. And I was like, I have that one, that I wonder if this fits. And I do think that like thematically it really fits, because like so much of the record is like, kind of like about death, but in a soft way. And so I think that it fits.
And kind of going into some of the other connections to like a bygone era, how does something like the Tintin nod, play into all of that?
So that song I didn't have a name for it immediately. It was just a melody that I wrote and I really liked. And I wanted to build it out into something bigger, and I just kind of couldn't. And I eventually was like, I think that this melody sequence just is the song. Like, I don't think I should add anything else.
Yeah.
The Tintin reference was because the whole record was written as this like grand gesture to this person who I really, really loved, who really, really just did not care about me at all at the time. And one of the things, it was this person who I just felt we were so similar. And we had really similar upbringings. And one of the things that was similar in our upbringings was that we both were like raised with parents who read us a lot of Tintin. And so it was kind of like the fake opera character and that melody. It kind of just like all made sense, where I was like, it was like a wink and a nudge to this person, but then also just fit the rest of the album.
Now, and again, as a title, like totally makes sense, because it seems like kind of a cartoony, because obviously as a comic, you can't hear what she actually sounds like. You only hear it described to you. So It's like, there is kind of like a funny parallel there, that's like, oh, okay. For anybody who like gets the reference, that does kind of like make an incredible amount of sense.
Yeah. And not only that, but I'm pretty sure Tintin stands might bust me right now, because I'm not entirely sure, but I think that Bianca Castafiore, she was an opera singer, and I think she had a big crush on Captain Haddock, and that he thought she was super annoying and hated her.
Yeah, there was definitely like a tension there.
Yeah, which like fits also the narrative of the whole, like, it all made sense to me.
Thank you. Again, it's in layers. It works in layers.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about a little bit more about like the upcoming performances and stage show for this whole thing that you have planned, because anybody who is familiar with your back history knows that you have a very wild stage presence. Like you go all the fuck out, you bear everything.
Not anymore, I don't.
Well, I was gonna ask, because with this current album cycle, like what is the energy kind of going forward? I mean, what is kind of the ethos from here on out with it?
It's extremely still very high energy, but kind of in like a different way. I mean, with the older songs, like I'm still like flipping out and thrashing on the floor. I stopped doing onstage nudity like years ago, though. Like that stopped. Yeah. That stopped the moment that somebody told me not to. Like, one person had to ask me nicely not to do it, and then I was like, oh yeah, guess I'm done. But I just it's pretty now. Instead of the blue dye coming out of the mouth, it comes out of my eyes. But it's still like a present theme. I'm still wearing the same outfit, but it's like a little bit better now. It's like a better version of the outfit. But I think that it's a little bit more like, I don't want to like harm myself by saying this, but it's got a little bit more like musical energy, which is fun for me. And like, it never fully ends up like feeling like when I say musical, I mean like old musical, not like new one.
Yeah.
I feel like new musical theater is criminal and like has destroyed what could be a perfectly fine medium, but there is a kick line. So
I don't entirely disagree, honestly. But no, I do think that there is kind of a cool almost, I think on a lot of recent records on the indie circuit that there is kind of like an old school musical theatrics sort of thing that's come back, either through it, being on your record, being on like the new Spelling record, the new Lingua Ignota record. There is kind of like, again, like a decades old kind of classic musical theatrical aspect that I think is maybe coming back into play a little bit with it, again, as you say, sort of like being so completely missing from a lot of what we see now in modern musicals.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Like, I think that like what's interesting about musicals is like they used to be like for freaks. And that was what was cool about it. Like, when you say freaks, you mean the drama kids at school that everybody looked at weird? No, not even the drama kids at school. Cause like, that's a now thing that's annoying. It's like musical theater and it's hate. Like, it was like, it was for queers, and being queer was a bad thing.
Got it.
Like, and it was like, it was just like, it was more for people who were like on the edge of society a little bit. And like,
got it.
All of this stuff it was very beautiful, but everyone's voices were weird. Like even like Judy Garland, her voice is strange. Like she's one of the most beautiful singers of all time, but her voice is like, it's very specific to her. And I feel like musical theater has become this thing where it's like for the most cookie cutter, been trained since birth people ever, and all of the voices sound exactly the same, and it's really disturbing.
When exactly do you think society fumbled the bag on that? When did we fuck that up? Was it Glee?
Rent.
Was it Disney?
It was Rent somehow.
It was Rent. Rent fucked it up. Wow.
Like, I don't think that Rent was necessarily the bad one, or maybe, but like beyond, like after that, I'm not thinking, I can't think of one that came out a way that I liked.
Well, as you say, like Rent isn't necessarily bad, but it's sort of like
Rent is bad.
Like it's I'm not saying it is or isn't bad. I'm saying not necessarily, which means maybe it's arguable that it's bad. But it opens up the floodgates for like, yeah, like, you know, you sort of need to be a little sexy for this one. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you need to be like a, you know, a hot young, you know, sort of like budding artist and, you know, sexy art type sort of on, you know, sort of like the metropolitan scene that we're really invested in kind of like the progression and success of because you're so young and cool and hot.
Yeah, exactly. And that happens to everything. You know, it happened to punk, like it happens to it happens to everything where it's like all of a sudden it's the hot rich people doing it again. And I'm like, who let you in here?
You know, that's exactly. I feel like that's honestly the kind of gatekeeping that we need to start doing. Like
no more hot rich people should be allowed
you know,
to
I think there's like I think you know I think we're doing a lot of the wrong gatekeeping as of late. I think we're gatekeeping the wrong things or focusing a little bit too much on gatekeeping the wrong things when meanwhile what we're not paying attention to is like all the hot rich people just literally walking into everything, and we really need to just like start closing the door. Like, you know, we're worried about like language this, problematic that, when it's really the hot rich people just fucking up everything.
Well, they're also the ones that are fucking up those conversations.
Sure.
You know, because I agree with a lot of those politics, but I think that the hot rich people come in and they're not connected to the issue.
Got
you know? and then they make the conversation weird.
It comes hand in hand. It comes hand in hand. Yeah. Got it. No, I
agree. We should gatekeep that.
No, I think that's a great. I think that's a great energy. I think that's a great ethos to have. We need to just again start watching out for hot rich people.
Well, yeah, because I mean, it creates this weird standard that I don't agree with, where it's like people. It's like, you know, we did Tiny Desk, and then it's like, you know, some of the comments are like people being like, this band is good, but like they really need to replace the singer. And I'm like, the issue is that you're thinking of me as being a singer, which like I'm not a singer, you know, like I'm a lot of things and I do sing in the bands, but I'm not like a singer. Like you wouldn't hire me to like sing a song on a commercial. My voice is weird, you know, like I understand that, you know, and it's just not meant to be that. So it's weird. It's a weird criticism, and it comes from too many hot rich people involved in things.
You know, that's also I think like a little that's a little disappointing to see that kind of sentiment coming from like a Tiny Desk comment section, because you would think like a snooty tote bag NPR audience would sort of like get that, you know, would sort of like. But I guess not, you know. Yeah,
well, there's just like people just don't want to hear anything that's in any way grating, and I think that that's like anti what art is supposed to be doing, you know, where it's just like, it's not that I'm not trying to make my stuff sound like, I'm not sitting here being like, it's not supposed to sound good. I don't give a fuck, because I do, I do try to make it sound good, but like there are realities in the music, like there is intentional dissonance. Like my voice also is just a weird, you know, specific voice, and like there's stuff about it that's like not going to sound completely smooth, you know, and then people come up and they're like, wait, this doesn't sound completely smooth. And I'm like, well, I don't know why you clicked on this. You know, like,
you know, go a little bit into that as far as like an artistic ethos, because in terms of like curating music, supporting music, trying to advocate for records that I think are really good and really special, that's often something I have a hard time putting a really, I guess, like, you know, clear quality level on and importance on, you know, the quality that things can be good but also grating, because, you know, often I find myself, there are some records that you know, I think yours is an example where there's almost just like a perfect amount of it, but then there are others where it seems like it goes too far. And when I say too far, I don't necessarily mean like you know, oh, it's a harsh noise record, I can't listen to it. I mean in terms of like, you know, I'm not going to name too many names, but, you know, I'll say as like a recent example, that pop singer Tones and I, whose vocal I can just not get over at all. You know, and they're not the only example. You know, some vocals and some, you know, qualities of grading, either in the instrumentation or somewhere else, like, does seem like it's so off to the point where it just sounds like a fucking mess. But if you have just a little bit of it in some sense, it sort of makes, I guess, it creates some kind of magic. And I don't know if you, as somebody who's conscious of that dynamic and puts it in their own music consciously, like, how much is a good amount? How far is too far in your opinion?
Well, I do think that all of it just depends on like your intention, as obvious as that sounds. Like, I think that like, I feel like I'm always creating circumstances where it would be like almost impossible for something to sound perfect. And then I try really, really hard to make it sound perfect. And then it doesn't quite land there. And then I think that that's where you get like the human quality that you want. Is like, I love the feeling of striving. And I love hearing that. Like, I really enjoy it when I hear a song where somebody almost doesn't hit the note that they're trying to hit, and then they do, because that I think is like a beautiful thing. And you're hearing something very honest that is like someone trying to do something. But I do think that like sometimes people just like are a little bit tasteless, or that their taste doesn't align with your, like at that point, it's just up to personal taste, where it's like, if you just can't stand someone's voice, you just can't stand their voice, Yeah.
No, while I feel very fortunate every day, honestly, to be able to, wake up to the fact that I have an audience of people who will, in good faith, take an album, that I recommend to them and give it an honest shot. But sometimes, like when I listen to certain records, or I'm very into certain artists, or I watch other people talk about what they sort of see as like, yeah, this is a weird ass album. I don't know why he recommended this. Like, and this is, I guess, sort of the beauty of like experiencing art and experiencing music. But it feels like sometimes it feels like I'm 20 seasons deep into a show that nobody else is watching. So it's like, so like nobody is like up to the season that I'm at. And in order to get them to this point, like I would have to explain so many things that, as hard as I try, and even though it's my job to explain them, it's almost nearly impossible. But then every once in a while I run across other people who miraculously are, for some reason, watching the same show. And maybe they're not into as many seasons. Maybe they're further than I am. But, there's almost like a connection there. I have no idea what the hell the point I was making is, but it sort of seems like
good one.
it does feel like that sometimes, and I don't know exactly like, I guess it sort of just at the end of the day comes down to a matter of personal taste. But sometimes I at least like to believe if some people are kind of exposed to the right thing, or randomly happened upon either your record or a bunch of records that are in a similar style or were influenced by it, like something would kind of click, and then suddenly you'd be watching the same show in a way.
Yeah. Well, that is the hope. And I think that, that's also the hope with like, I think even with just making something, like, I think that it's the closest thing, like, making music or making art or movies or anything. It's the closest thing that you have to handing somebody the way that you feel, like it's like when you're a little kid and you have a stomach ache, and your stomach ache is so bad, but no one is taking it seriously. And you wish for 1 second that you could just transfer your stomach ache to someone else so that they would feel it, so that they would know that you have to go home from school, and like, I feel like making music for me is that, where I'm making something and I'm hoping that I've done it just right, so that when somebody hears it, they feel something that I felt. And like, that's a magical thing, and you don't always quite hit the mark, but it's like, I feel like that's the goal. And what I don't know what point I was trying to make with that either, but I just that I agree with you, I guess, in that, in listening to something, like, I guess people just want different things out of music too, where like some people want something to have on in the background. Like some people want something that sounds very, very polished. Like personally, what I want is like, I want to see somebody trying as hard as they can. And I want to see somebody having a really good time. And like, that's all I really care about. And everything else, not really.
I think we both kind of failed in our rambles there because what we're talking about is so you can't put a number on it. It's like really difficult to quantify in in inarguable way. What exactly people are looking for, and how much is too much of whatever, and the converse. But still, I appreciate you coming on and telling us about the record, telling us about the experience, the writing process, and getting a little philosophical with me too on it.
Thank you.
All right,
Yeah.
we're looking forward to the live dates and everything. When are those starting to come through?
We're touring, we're opening for Ice Age
Yeah,
from
yeah.
from March 1st to March 12th. And then after that we'll be at South by Southwest, but that's still up in the air.
Okay, well, good luck on all those dates and all those shows. And for everybody watching on YouTube, obviously we're going to link to Madison and everything down below. And yeah, I mean, we'll talk to you again next album cycle, or we'll hear from you soon in some other way.
Yay, thank you so much.
All right, thanks for coming on.